My name is host Eric, and I, after all these years, am finally the host of Talking with Famous People. This morning, what I would like to do is talk about a few different subjects, but I'd like to start with truth and agency. I really enjoyed typing that ENTP last night. Damien was his name. Perhaps my favorite moment of the conversation, and the thing that this prompted me to do a lot of thinking. Hello, Amadeo Joshua GT. Um, when I asked him the question, how does he define truth? He did the smartest thing I've ever heard anybody do in answering that question. He quoted back to me my definition of it. And in the aftermath of that conversation, I started thinking, if we were to make genuine progress discursively as a human population, the most powerful frame change we could possibly make. I'm doing well, Amadeo. How are you? The most significant frame change we could make would be if people understood truth as as a status that they confer onto statements, or a status a mantle they check statements to see if it deserves. But better to just say it's a status people confer onto statements. Because if we were to operationalize our understanding of truth entirely, to say something is true is exactly the same as saying, I think you should agree with this. And the problem with our understanding of reality in general, a lot of times, is predicated on the removal of the agent from our analysis of reality. If we think that truth occurs outside of somebody making a claim or advocating something, having an affirmation of some sort or a negation of some sort, then we will be wildly confused because we think that truth is an object that exists out in the world or something. It is absolutely not. Truth is always a rhetorical device. Now, the thing is, the other important thing to remember about this understanding of truth is that it's always a rhetorical device, and whether or not something validates as true depends on what kind of statement you're making, whether and how something validates as true. So if I say to you, I went to the store yesterday, we can validate or falsify that statement by checking the security camera footage of the store. And that kind of statement, where I'm making a concrete statement about where I was at a certain time, that can only be validated or negated with empirics, you know. But if I'm making a statement like, if if it had rained yesterday, I would have canceled my plans today because the ground would have been too wet. But since it didn't, I have not canceled my plans. That's unfalsifiable because it's conditional that has as its antecedent uh, something that's already established as false. You can't falsify. The truth value of a conditional statement cannot be false if the first part of the conditional statement is false. For the whole statement to be false, the first part has to be true and the second part has to be false. So if you have a conditional statement like the one I just made, it's not relative to anything at all, Amadeo Joshua GT. It's logically necessarily true in every instance because of the truth tables for conditional statements. So whether or not we determine something is true or false is is determined by what kind of statement we're making as well as what kind of substantiation we make. Truth is not relative entirely, neither is it static. The problem that we currently have is people think they can treat truth as an object of analysis independent of people saying things. But that's not the case. So when we understand that everybody, regardless of their wrong frame on truth itself, some people think it's relative, some people think it's static, that everybody needs to understand truth as a form of action they're taking rather than as something outside of them. So the thing is, like when people say truth is relative, what they mean is, look, there's no the truth, it's just your truth. Well, that's bullshit. But it's, in some sense, what it's doing is it's misinterpreting the responsibility of every individual to have a relationship with truth in their discursive efforts as um, as an indication that truth isn't a useful status or something. Truth is an incredibly useful status to help us eliminate wrongness. And but the thing is, our engagement with truth needs to be nuanced. We need to understand that you engage with the claim this statement is true differently depending on the kind of statement it is. And to make blanket statements like truth is relative or truth is static is not understanding that truth is part of your agency, not something outside of you. Now, confusion of the collective and the origin is a human logic error. I mean, I don't really believe in confusion of the collective because one of the biggest problems in philosophy, discourse, whatever, is that people like to attribute agency to groups. Groups may have agency in the sense that, like, a corporation makes a decision, blah, 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 blah. But um, what a collective cannot have is confusion. Only individuals can be confused. What a collective cannot have is vision. Only an individual can have that, you know? How does that truth agency paradigm apply to absolute state of a thing? Well, remember, to the extent that there's an absolute state of a thing, it's because you're asserting that. It's not, it, and that assertion, those set of words regarding that thing may or may not be defensible. The more defensible it is, the more true we call it, you know? Um, there are statements that have no wiggle room at all, like the conditional statement I said earlier, that is always necessarily true. Anybody who tries to confer a status of false onto it doesn't understand the mechanics of using truth as an agent. The identity theory Moore and Russell espouse takes truth to be a property of propositions. It's not a property of propositions. It's a tag that says remember, anytime anybody says this is true, what they're really saying is I want you to agree with me. When we remember that, we can collapse all truth issues into that. No claims or arguments are made about truth except that somebody wants somebody else to agree with them. So truth is really a word that just means I think you should agree with this. When we try to remove the individual making the claims, like, why do I think you should agree with my understanding of truth? Well, because it's the most defensible understanding. And if you wanted to attribute the status of truth to something outside of you instead of an action you're taking, then you'd have to say that truth is the status we afford to statements that are most defensible. Then you have to understand, well, what does defensibility mean? It means that the claims being made are still standing after being subjected to scrutiny and negation. Yes, all the existing theories of truth are wrong. Okay, correspondence theory, the identity theory, those are wrong understandings of truth. So, and you know it is because look at what Plato Stanford here says. The correspondence theory of truth at its core is an ontological thesis, a belief that is true if there exists an appropriate entity, a fact, to which it corresponds. If there is no such entity, the belief is false. Of course, that's ridiculous because those entities, quote unquote, don't exist outside of somebody making the argument. So if I were to make the argument for the correspondence theory, I would say the fact is that I'm referring to is the reality that individuals make statements about externalities. The problem with the correspondence theory is individuals don't just make statements about externalities, and it is not always the case that the truth of a thing is based on something factual. It's generally, very often is based on something simply structural. So it's a huge mistake to believe that somehow truth is determined or occurs in ways not linked directly to language and the intent of an individual making an advocacy. The shorthand way to say it, I'll just sum it up with this repetition here. Truth is an action taken by an individual in order to get other individuals to agree with them. And the takeaway about this in general is we're never well served to define things in non-operational ways. Because non-operational definitions don't allow you to test something to see if it qualifies as an example of that thing. And when we understand operationalizing definitions correctly, then it becomes very clear how truth is an action and not something that exists outside of the action. That doesn't make it entirely relative, because language is such a powerful tool that it turns out the best arguments are correct, that they withstand scrutiny and are still standing after endless amounts of negation because they're right. You know, it's like language, put it this way. When phenomena have explanations, the nature of language is such that when it makes wrong explanations, it produces artifacts that allows the thinker to successfully identify elements that are wrong and elements that are correct. Now, you should be saying at this point, okay, Eric, you're using wrong correct in lieu of true, but you're still attributing that status to the object of analysis. You're not talking about it as though it were an action you're taking. Well, there's no good explanation as to why it is that things that need to be explained have only one explanation that doesn't break down under informed scrutiny and negation. I can't explain why it is that things that need explaining always have one correct explanation and others are incorrect. Now, this is for things that can be explained, not merely interpreted. Okay? So there's your axiomatic level of where there's no explanation. There's no possible explanation for why there's only one correct explanation for things that can be explained. And if you wanted to do real powerful philosophy work, you'd answer that question. Why is it that things that need to be explained only have one possible explanation, one correct explanation? And why exactly is it that language, the nature of language, allows us just via engagement with these symbols to parse away the wrong bits of explanation and leave merely the correct explanation? There's that I don't have any explanation for. And I don't know if it's possible to have an explanation for that. Except to say that that's what language is. It's the superpower of understanding. Postmodernists would say that there's more than one answer that meets the requirement for correct enough. Well, again, let me remind you of the thing I said. Things that can be explained rather than simply interpreted have one correct explanation. Things that are not subject to explanation, rather are subject to interpretation, in that instance, the postmodernists are right. Because if you're trying to say, explain how the character Jamie's motivation links to her action in this novel, that's something that's subject to interpretation, not explanation. Explanation, the difference between interpretation and explanation is explanations always end up being exclusively correct once they've been rendered correctly. So we've answered the question of why the continents float around with plate tectonics. That will never change. We will never go back to expanding Earth theory. We will never find another alternate explanation that works just as well for explaining why continents move around. Because why continents move around is something that can be explained and needs an explanation. Why character Mia acted like Mia in book Mia is not something that needs explaining and doesn't have a single explanation. It's only open to interpretations. So, but I mean, the postmodernists are right when it comes to, say, interpretations of literature. There are many interpretations that qualify as correct, even if they're in direct contradiction with each other, as long as they are substantiated with evidence from the text. And then people can have those two different interpretations, and neither of them be wrong. Both of them be sustained by their argumentation, and neither party will ever actually engage discursively in a debate about the subject, because it'd be silly. Because there is no single correct interpretation. There are merely interpretations that are adequately substantiated for the purposes of this dumbass literature essay, or substantiations that are inadequate, and therefore it's a weak paper, right? But like with things that are interpretable but not explainable, you can have wildly creative interpretations that the author's making that the author thinks is bullshit, and it still be a very successful essay, maybe even convincing. Of course, people who are convinced by things like that don't understand that one oughtn't to have conviction in things that are merely subject to interpretation. I mean, the thing is, observations exist, but to engage with truth, one has to make statements about them. When one makes statements about one's observations, generally one is asserting that they are true. So, for example, statements, if I say a statement like this, my cat likes cheese, meaning wise, it's identical to it is true that my cat likes cheese. The only difference functionally in those two sentences is in the latter sentence, I'm making it explicit that I want you to agree with me by saying the words, it is true. When we understand language and the making of statements as an action someone takes, and we think about the illocutionary frame, in other words, what's implicitly the case anytime somebody makes a statement of a certain sort is that that statement is identical to the statement, it is true that, followed by whatever they said. In contrast, if you ask a question, what comes before a question? What are we having for lunch? What comes before the question is, I want you to tell me. It's implied, right? We don't talk with out of a frame of reference that says it's critically important that I include all perspective elements in this and speak accurately. If we were to do that, it would always be subject, action, verb, object. There'd never be any linking verbs. Nobody would ever say, this is true. They'd say, I would like you to agree with the following. Don't believe everything on the internet, John Adams. Fantastic. But have commonalities for humanity been noticed through observation, right? Are there commonalities or does it differ depending on each social environment? Well, the point is commonalities and distinctions come after language, not before. One makes distinctions by talking. One establishes commonalities by talking. And in fact, prior to us having words for something, that thing doesn't exist. So for all of us, before we had words that explained cognitive functions and used those words to understand reality, we didn't have any model for people or reality or the interaction. The two things are intertwined irrevocably. Prior to me learning about cognitive functions, I was wrong about everything. Why? Because the right words hadn't been established as occupying the top level frame. Don't believe what you read. Don't believe what you see. Do believe what you hear. You left out the third part. Here I am. Oh, go fly a kite, John Adams, Ben Franklin. Good stuff. A correct quote would say, um, validate what you read to see if it either upholds its burden to affirm or successfully negates. Interpret what you see to the extent that it's not immediately obvious what you're looking at. Do you think quantifications exist because we observe them? Absolutely. And in fact, in primitive cultures and stuff, so there were various populations that had these quantities: 1, 2, and a group. And those individuals who grew up without any other numbers couldn't even conceive of distinguishing between quantities other than in those 3 categories. Inconceivable that you might articulate further quantification distinctions, right? So, the thing is, it doesn't mean that distinct objects in space don't exist. It means that distinction itself supervenes on consciousness and observation, not the other way around. It seems to fit intuitively better into our brains somehow to imagine a world that's objects first, that we come in and observe and start making distinctions based on how it is. That's backwards. Objects, distinctions, all those various things exist only in one way, because an individual human being is existing through time. That's a reality. Their reality, the combination of their attention on internal and externalities. That's a reality. Now, because of language, because we can communicate with each other in various ways that aren't linguistically as well, it is the case that our realities are so overlapped that for functional purposes, we can say we're individual agents existing in a single physical reality. That may or may not be actually the case. If it is actually the case that we have a single static physical reality, then that would be proof of God, or some equivalent like a simulation, right? Because we already know that existentiality supervenes on observation. And so, for all of humanity, that meteorite hurtling towards Earth doesn't exist until some astronomer observes it. There's no possible way to establish that it existed prior to that. We can only deduce that it must have, quote unquote, right? Well, for things to exist at all, if we've deduced that it must have existed prior to us observing it, then it must mean it was observed by somebody else or something else that qualifies as an observer. And to imagine the whole universe existing unobserved until we observe it requires a grand observer, which one would call God. And its defining quality would be that it has the capacity to observe all things continually, such that the universe is rendered extant by observation prior to the introduction of individual agent observers like us. But of course, the most significant point is that the distinction the distinction of existentiality itself predicates on our making that distinction with language. Michael Foucault was a outhouse. It was a porta potty spillage on the highway of truth. That man was such a horrible scumbag. What I mean by that is his brainless advocacy of some sort of primitive, shiny, underthought concept of communitarianism is the devil. I hate Foucault so much. And you should too. Because he's a TI polar person operating in philosophy. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, ENFPs, stay the fuck out of philosophy and politics. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're doing real damage. You know, idiots read your fancily written bullshit and think it means something. Foucault. If I could go back in time to when he was alive, I would go fucking yell the living fuck out of him. And explain to him why he was such a fuck brain and how much damage he's done to people's intellectual development. You get other idiots who are driven primarily by some stupid political agenda that's wrong, and who find idiots like him and use those cards in debate rounds to try to justify their communitarian bullshit. I mean, I hate doomed to fail communitarian bullshit. Do you know what Foucault's advocacy on justice is? It's that all the stakeholders get together and reach consensus about what the most just outcome is. That is not a way to have a free and civil society. That is a train wreck plus a car crash plus a plane crash of unworkable chaos. Get all the stakeholders involved. Like if somebody commits a crime, right? Like Joe robs me of my car and then crashes it into a tree. Police arrest him. We go to court. We've got Joe's family, me, my family, the cops, some rehabilitation advocates, and various other parties. And we sit there and discuss what the most just outcome would be until we reach consensus. And that's what happens. When you have that many parties at the table trying to all agree about what comprises the just outcome, well, what do you do if somebody doesn't agree? Do you just put everyone's lives on hold indefinitely until there's consensus, ignoring the fact that different people have different capacities to put their lives on hold? I mean, talk about nonsense, right? Absolute fucking nonsense. That is not a feasible way to accomplish justice in any sane universe. Because what it's trying to say is that nobody's right or wrong. That everybody's kind of right or wrong. Everybody has an investment or a stake in the thing, and it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It ignores the fact that we need to have laws that are static and give us guidance about what would happen if we break them, besides just you go through this impossibly horrible process of group arbitration of your fate. You know, a just society is one where the law is applied the same to everybody, and if you have that approach, even if it did reach verdicts, they'd be wildly different from one another. So you'd have one person guilty of shoplifting going to jail for 10 years, and one person guilty of shoplifting getting a reward. It'd be like, talk about invalidating any possible mechanics of actual justice. And this is his vision for a just world. This guy is a fucking cancer on the discursive landscape. I gotta go get a cigarette. And the thing is, because justice needs to be attained not via agreement, but via consistency against a static standard. So if in the status quo we've got people committing the same crime getting wildly different sentences, then judges are given too much discretion in sentencing. And that needs to be pulled back, because we have, instead of people's agreement, we have something real to use in calculating matters of justice. Considerations such as proportionality, liability, we can parse everything like that down. For example, the difference between criminal and civil liability is intentionality. Very straightforward. So on the question of whether this comprises murder, manslaughter, or wrongful death, depends on the intentionality of the individual entirely. We shouldn't determine the fate of the person responsible for that death based on what a bunch of people sitting around a table agree. We should actually determine whether there was intentionality based on the evidence and charge them accordingly. And then if it's proved beyond reasonable doubt that they've met the triggers for this crime and guilt for this crime, then the jury should find them guilty, right? That's how to have a just society, so that everybody can equally appeal to the same static thing and point out, hey, this is bullshit. The law says meow, not meow. And if you want to know where injustice emerges in America, it's every place we supplant TI principles with TE efficacies. Plea bargaining, for example, is the source of almost all injustice in criminal justice system in America. 97% of federal trials, or something like 95% of all trials, or 92% of all trials, or something like that, never see a jury trial. They get settled by a plea bargaining. And because prosecutors aren't constrained by principalism, they've used their capacity to charge people with whatever in order to bully people who many of whom are either innocent or certainly don't deserve to go to jail, into accepting guilty pleas because they're threatened with 25 to life. Like the guy I saw in the jury trial, the guy I was jury for, what he was actually guilty of was simple assault, probably. If I were to factually parse out his relationship with what happened, he was guilty of simple assault. But none of us on the jury thought that the simple assault he committed deserved to be tried even in court because the guy was asking for it and it wasn't a big deal. So the thing is, the prosecutor though charged him with a slew of different crimes that if we had found him guilty of all of them would have put him in jail for a long ass time. Why did the prosecutor do that? Because the guy wouldn't plead guilty to a minor crime. So this is how injustice occurs. Occasionally you'll get a jury who, an excellent prosecutor, a shitty defense attorney, and a dumbass jury who will convict on all those things, creating this massive injustice where the guy who hit somebody with a plastic squeegee that broke immediately and then pepper sprayed them when they wouldn't let him leave would have been found guilty of assault with felony assault with a tear gas weapon, with and that's how injustice occurs. And so what we have to do in that instance is we need to make a part of a jury process that's like discovery, but it's about evaluating the legitimacy of the charges based on the facts and evidence pre-trial. Like, judges should intervene to prevent prosecutors from overcharging people in order to force a plea bargain. If they're going to try to keep plea bargaining, the prosecutors have to plea bargain from a fair spot, namely what the actual charge is going to be, not what possible everything they could throw at them imaginably. That gives them an unfair advantage. And the reason it gives them an unfair advantage, and the reason it's not viewed as an unfair advantage in legal circles, is because people say, well, if in fact you're not even remotely guilty of those things you're being charged with, you have no reason to fear you won't be found guilty of those in a jury trial. So, but that's not taking seriously the emotional aspect of it. That wouldn't work on me, never in a billion years. If I ever get charged with anything, you bet your fucking life it's going to trial. But most people aren't me. And most people hear, listen, if you get convicted, you're going to be 25 to life as determinant. Okay, fuck it, I better not fight this. The possible consequences are too big. It's totally a bluff, right? We ended up finding that guy not guilty of all charges, including simple assault. Imagine if Foucault's way were done. There would never be justice attained. Everything would be an unjust compromise. That's why Foucault's evil. Because he was so subjective that he didn't recognize that he was too stupid to write philosophy. Well, the thing is, the American justice system is incredibly just to me and people just like me. Because I know exactly what I'm doing when I'm saying words. There's no possible way I'd ever get treated unjustly by the criminal justice system because I'm smart, correct, and understand how TI is king in court. But if you are not master of the top level frames here, then you are just going to find like a prosecutor threatening you with all this time in jail incredibly frightening. and incredibly, incredibly convincing, you know? Even Taylor, ESTP, he uh, he took the plea. Of course, he fucked up. If after he just gotten busted the first time, he had stopped what he was doing and listened to Eric and gone with my plan, which even his lawyer said was brilliant, but didn't want to do it anyway. But then, because then Taylor got busted again, and then that blew up the whole thing, you know. Um, but if he had just, you know, kept his kept his money out of the drug dealer's hands for a few days, you know, for a month or two, he would have totally won that case using exactly the argument I determined. They had double bound him. The only possible way to interpret it was that they had arrested him prior to attaining the evidence that justified the arrest. So you got to throw that shit out. And it was more it was more excellent a legal bullet than what I just even expressed. I don't remember all the specs of it, but I had the case law, and it was absolutely determinate on the question. So, right. But the thing is, like, almost always you can win if you're not guilty of wrongdoing. Okay, you can be guilty of a crime and not guilty of wrongdoing. Like, I was guilty of a crime in Oklahoma when I was driving down the road with multiple ounces of weed in a lockbox next to me and cleaning my glass weed pipe with a torch while driving with my knees and speeding down Oklahoma highways with expired tags and California plates. Needless to say, I got pulled over and arrested. And in that particular instance, there was no way I was going to get out of the consequences because they did everything by the book, and I could not have been more stupid in my brazen flaunting of the law on multiple vectors. I'm just lucky they didn't find the meth. Yeah, sure, there's such a thing as a good cop. I suspect most cops are good cops, especially nowadays. 10 years ago, different question. But in the aftermath of all this BLM shit, cops are much more trying to do their actual jobs only, which means like respond when somebody calls and says a crime's been committed against me, rather than trying to be proactive and find drug users to bust and stuff like that. You know, I think cops these days, if you aren't doing something brazen, they don't want unnecessary engagements with the population because that's how people get shot. You're not arresting me because I was speeding. You're arresting me because I'm Latino, Dr. House. Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, it is, of course, a rights violation to vandalize, and therefore in the appropriate purview of the cops. Somebody's been victimized by a crime, and therefore that person should, the state, the government is supposed to deal with that kind of shit stop individuals from violating the rights of other individuals or punish them and stuff. Now, if you were vandalizing public property, then it's still the same thing still applies, except instead of an individual being the victim, it's the state. That would be an example of a legitimate crime against the state is if you vandalize public property. So those things ought to be enforced by the criminal justice system, but they're minor crimes, and that's where proportionality comes in. When we apply principles like proportionality, that the punishment should fit the crime, then we we do a great job of remembering to put the horse before the cart and prioritize justice over over mechanical application of legal processes. Of course, that's why it's critically important to have a jury and not just legal professionals, a jury of your peers. And of course, if you wanted to maximize justice in the American justice system in ways beyond just getting rid of plea bargaining, which would be ideal, get rid of it entirely. But if you can't get rid of it entirely, at least compel prosecutors to plea bargain from a fair bargaining position. The other important thing you could do to improve justice in America would be to inform juries that they can nullify and explain it well. It is possible for you, the jury, to nullify. Let me explain what that means. What that means is that as you believe that finding this individual guilty would be unjust because it would result in the punishment of somebody who committed no wrongdoing, regardless, while they also broke a law, or because you believe that the wrongdoing committed is not a crime against person or property, something like that. Then that would minimize the amount of juries that nullify into those that meet those criteria, limit the context in which a jury can nullify. A police department can have good and bad people in them, but all of them have the same power. Some people shouldn't be working as cops. Well, that's absolutely the case. I would love to see police departments hire more resolution-minded people and fewer billy club kind of people, But also, it's the case that at least some portion of what the cops do is exactly what they should be doing: busting bad people who committed serious crimes. And when they do that, they should always bust those people in ways that are very purposeful about not doing any harm to that person physically. The absolute minimum amount of harm, and only if it's absolutely necessary. In other words, the current way of cops, where they kind of want to get into the physical confrontations, that's not good policing. I mean, all you got to do is look at my video from the Pomona cops. I have a video on my channel. If you've never seen it, it's extremely compelling. It was in Pomona, and the cops there was a guy who was like a crazy homeless guy or whatever, and he'd gone onto somebody's porch with it. Like, I guess you'd call it a samurai sword or something, but it was. It didn't really. I couldn't tell exactly what it was. It looked like a long metal thing. Okay, I don't know. Could have even been like a metal pole, but I couldn't. I'm not sure what it was. But I'd heard among other people in the crowd that it was some kind of a sword. Anyway, the cops had formed a big. There was a million cops there. They formed a big perimeter around these people's house, and the guy were telling the guy things with the megaphones and stuff to do stuff. And he was like, he had a towel on his head, which I mean, I don't mean like he had some sort of turban or something. I mean, he had a towel like sitting on top of his head. And anyway, when I first got there, and the fire department was there, and helicopters were going overhead. When I first got there, I said, why don't they just squirt this guy with the hose? It's cold outside. And if he's squirted with the hose, he's going to give up real quick. He's going to be so cold. Now, that's the kind of thinking that the police need to have, right? How can we resolve this without use of force? Instead, they did not squirt him with the hose, and they ended up when he just sort of moved slightly towards this side after he was kind of pacing back and forth. One time he paced a little bit more this direction. They shot him with multiple rubber bullets. And when he went to the ground, they tased the living fuck out of him for no reason. Until I shouted, "Stop tasing him!" At which point, a lot of other people, after hearing me say it, started saying, "Stop tasing him." And of course, when I said stop tasing him, because I was the ringleader of the group that was opposing the cops tasing the fuck out of this guy for no reason, a cop came up to me and pushed me off the curb with the back of his butt of his rifle. And I got $5,000 for it. Right. And imagine you've got a whole gang of heavily armed, burly men and women. You got one guy with some kind of thing in his hand. He's not like looking like he's wielding a weapon. He's looking like a crazy guy just kind of walking back and forth with it. And you're telling me this whole big ass gang of burly ass men. No, a white cop did me, like butted me with his gun off of the curb. But as far as the homeless guy, he was like Mexican or whatever. I don't know. It didn't matter. It wasn't a race thing. It wasn't a race thing at all. It was here's a vagrant homeless person who looks to be mentally ill and isn't complying with our orders. And so, as a consequence, hooray, we get to torture him. Oh goody, he's not complying with our orders. Therefore, let's shoot him with a bunch of rubber bullets and tase the living fuck out of him. I'll find you guys the video I'm talking about. It's been a while since I've watched it. It's super intense for me to watch because it's just such an intense video, But it makes me so proud of myself because everybody was standing there silent, watching this go down until I said something. So I did not demonstrate the bystander effect. I'm very proud of myself with that. Okay. I'm going to put this link here. Yeah, well, I think there were a little bit too many people around for them to shoot him with a radio gun. I think I'm going to watch this video right now, actually, myself. I'll tell you what, I'll turn the camera on so you can watch it too. You're gonna show it to us. Why'd you even bother with whole telling what was gonna happen already? You spoiled it. Okay, quick disclaimer. I say in this video that the cops killed this little dog. I do believe the cops ran over this little dog, but I have no proof of that. So I retract that claim.
Hi friends, this is Jerry, talking with many people. As you see, action is on the scene here at Bonnie Gray Street in the lovely low mid-income area of Bonnie here. We have a gentleman on the porch. He's got a towel on his head, and he's got a machete. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cops are on the fence. Many cop cars, and a bunch of people around here looking, not just us, right? And a helicopter in the sky, and a fire truck. So from what I understand talking to locals, this gentleman on the porch with the towel on his head, he went to this house with the towel on his head and a machete in his hand, seeking admission to the house home. And I was surprised to learn the people did not let him in, because he doesn't live there. Well, understandably, they call the cops, and now we've got this big standoff. I've recommended, and I think it would be a good idea, that the cops just tell the firemen who are over there with the fire truck, to tell them to just squirt him with a hose. Or just squirt him with the hose over there. Because if he's wet, he's going to start getting cold, and he won't want to stand on the porch with a machete. Yeah, I don't hear him say anything. Maybe talking to the cops at a volume we can't hear. But at this point, with all these people around, I'm pretty sure the cops are going to try to avoid shooting him as they possibly can. So unless he charges them with a machete, they're not going to shoot him. I would suggest that the hose solution is the best idea. Just squirt him with a hose. They put the machete down, or they're going to keep squirting with a hose. That's what I would advise.
Well, he is saying stuff, so be quiet.
Okay, I have to be quiet. Well, he tried to move towards the cops. He is moving towards the cops. And at least one of them has a gun aiming right at your head. So, hopefully they don't have to shoot him. I mean, they don't have to shoot him regardless. But hopefully they don't have to shoot him. If they can't manage to get a cow on his head and a machete in his hand, if they can't manage everything without shooting them, then they're not very good at their job. So, obviously, most people aren't going to be shocked to discover that he is going towards them. Oh, shit! I mean, they shot something. They probably shot taser. They shot taser then. Well, they're not shooting bullets. Did they shoot him? What is that? They're not shooting him with bullets, obviously, or he'd be down, you know? Just stop. Stop. Don't shoot him anymore. You're not going to give him up after this. Oh, for God's sake, stop it. All you fucking did, you gave him that shooting him or something? Come on. If it were me and some one other dude, we could apprehend him without using any shooting anything. Stop what? I'm making a point here, you know? Why? Okay, well, I agree they're not shooting with bullets, and I think that's good. I'm not saying that they're not kids. Alright, well, open the area again. I'm not saying that these are horrible or doing terrible job. I'm just saying, oh, come on. They're not shooting with bullets, are they? You can't possibly. They're not shooting with bullets, I don't think. It's like pellets or something. You don't need to shoot them at all.
They don't have it done. Look at that.
Stop it. You're not fucking killing. All you fucking do is just grab his ass. Yeah, we're gonna need the paramedics. That whole big gang of here. Just grab his ass. There you go, the paramedics. Seriously, me and Taylor forgot to get his number. It's taking the living fuck out of me. That whole thing at the top, when they got taken that much, I mean, just fucking grab it. Stop fucking tasing him! That's enough! Stop tasing him! That's enough! Stop hurting him! You have no reason to be damaging him or harming him! You got him already! You're a whole gang of men! Back off! Get out of here! No! Excuse me! Back off and get out of the street! Oh my god! You just physically assaulted me! You just physically assaulted me! For no reason! You just assaulted me, you criminal! You fucking criminal!
Get out of
He just assaulted me!
He's putting, I didn't even touch. Nobody saw me touch him.
I didn't think you assaulted me, it's that he did!
Okay, he's doing his job. He
By
put his hands on the line.
assaulting citizens?
There's a fucking crackhead right there. There's kids in the house. And
So,
you're on
so
the
how does
street.
that justify, how does that justify, how does that justify it? It doesn't justify his behavior.
Fucking hero.
Why don't you appreciate the good work this on some police here? Look at this. The cops killed this little fucking dog for absolutely no reason. No reason, kill it.
Wow, my God. That's so intense. Oh my God, that is so intense. Ah. How much more intense could that be? Whew. Now, in order to clear our emotional palettes, I'm going to play another emergency services video that's fun. Okay? Here, here it is. Okay. So, what you're about to see,
Look at the firemen. Here they come.
what you're about to see is a 1 minute long video. It's the most action-packed 1 minute video in history. It looks like it was set up on a movie lot or something. It's so action-packed.
Squirt hose on it. Go. Look, they're gonna squirt it. Let's watch them in action. Don't go that way, lady. Hey, lady! No, lady! Welcome to Arcadia. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah, you want to go a different direction, probably. Oh, it's making sparks. Look. Caroline's going. Ah, I'm gonna get out of the way too. This is more exciting than I thought it was gonna be. You guys can squirt it. Oh! You guys just don't squirt it with the hose.
In 1981,
Man, they've got that autoplay so fast they give you no chance to cancel. Anyway, that was action-packed, wasn't it? The long version of that video starts with me arriving on the scene first before any emergency services get there. I was across the street eating dinner when I saw I got there before the emergency service. I was eating dinner across the street. I saw some smoke, and I got up and I said to Al Reno, who I was having dinner with, I said, I got to go get this on film. And I ran across the street. I got there before the firemen or anybody. And I don't know what was going on, but whoever had crashed that car had apparently fled the scene. So, yeah, I know that lady, right? What was that lady thinking? I just walked past this thing is happening here as though it's no big deal. And just not listening to me at all. Obviously, I said, "Hey, lady, what are you doing?" You know. But anyway, that's the most action-packed minute of video I have ever made, and I can't believe my good fortune to have arrived for all of that stuff. You know. Yeah, the dog bit was horrible. That Pomona video is pretty crazy, huh? Yeah, it was me. I was filming it, and I got shoved off the shoved off the curb by the cop with the butt of his gun. That cop, I forget what his name was, but the sheriff's department actually um, contacted me as a victim of a crime to investigate their fellow cop. But at that point, I had already taken $5,000 to settle the matter, so I told the cops, well, as far as I'm concerned, justice has been done for me. I got what I think is an appropriate amount of money for what happened to me. I could have gotten a lot more probably but the thing is, what I wanted to have happen didn't happen. I wanted the cop himself to have to pay out of pocket to me $1,000. And, well, I mean, because it was as textbook and clear cut a case of a constitutional rights violation as well as an assault as one could possibly imagine. I was standing there with my phone above my head filming. I could not possibly nobody could possibly have interpreted me as a threat at all. And I was left alone entirely where I was until I said, stop tasing them, stop tasing them. At which point the cop rushed over and butted me in the chest with the butt of his gun off the curb. I mean, I wasn't physically hurt, but that's a First Amendment rights violation if there's ever been one, right? And the point is, cops have qualified immunity, but the Supreme Court has carved out situations in which their qualified immunity doesn't afford them any immunity. And what happened to me was exactly one such situation. So the cops should have had to pay out of pocket. I didn't think the city of Pomona should have to pay me. I thought the cops should have to pay me. And unfortunately, I needed $5,000, and the city said, "Well," I said, "Well, if you're not gonna make the cop pay me $1,000, then you have to pay me $5,000." And the city said, "How quickly can you sign this paper?" I said, "Fine, I'll sign it." But it was one of my happiest days when I went in there, when I finally got my chance to go in, and I had city people around me, and the lawyer for the guy who had been tased was interviewing me. Not the lawyer, an investigator working for the lawyer who, for the guy who got tased, was interviewing me. And it was the most satisfying thing I have ever done, because I got to tell my whole story. I got to complain about everything I wanted to complain about. Everybody listened to me. And the investigator working for the lawyer, for the guy who got tased, as it started, and his grin grew bigger and bigger and bigger the longer the conversation went on, because of course the whole thing was being recorded as an affidavit so it was admissible in court, right? And he could not have dreamed of a better person to be interviewing, because I'm extremely careful in my claim making. I'm as ideal a witness, even as an affidavit, as you can possibly conceive of. I explained exactly what happened. I was clearly not driven by an agenda, but by accurately describing everything. And he asked me directly, "Do you think that the use of force was appropriate?" And I said, "Absolutely not. There's no conceivable world in which this big gang of armed men can't tackle one homeless guy without tasing the living fuck out of him." This went from potentially appropriate use of force to street justice. There's no doubt about that. And you know that guy must have gotten so much money. I'm sure Pomona settled when they read that affidavit with just the amount of detail, precision, accuracy, correctness, righteous indignation, etc., that I was voicing. And remember, I was there to complain about what they did to me, not what they did to that guy. But I'm glad that my getting $5,000 from me helped that guy get more money. When did that happen? Well, I was living with Kimberly in Laverne, so it's about probably 5 years ago. I could reopen the tab and look at the date on it, but let's see.
In 1981,
No.
Look at the fireman. Here they come. Burn a hose on it. Look at the fireman.
God damn it. Control H. Seven 18 4 years ago. Almost. It'll be 5 in July. 5 years ago in July. It only got 2.4 thousand views. I'm surprised that video didn't get more views. I think conversation about the cops came up. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and so I started talking about it, and then I decided, well, I might as well just show the video. And then after I showed that video, it SI linked for me to the other emergency services video that I made, the action-packed 1 minute. So then I decided to watch that one. Clear the emotional palette too, because the one with the fireman and the lady is funny and crazy and like an action movie, and not sad at all or anger-inducing. Yeah, I made so many videos. It's crazy. It's unavoidable that I have a couple wild ones like that. But I wish I could find more of an audience for some of my my high production value videos, like the one where I go out shooting at a target with Tiffany and Mindy, and actually hit the target. That one, it didn't take a super long time to make because I had a pretty clear vision of how I was going to do it before I started, so I didn't have to do a lot of editing of the individual clips. But I really liked that video. 5 minutes long. A lot of stuff happens in it. It's got a fun kind of creative approach to making it, and it's got fewer than 100 views and like 9 likes and 1 dislike. Hi, CJ O'Connell. You know what's happening at 9 o'clock this morning? Oliver, I'm sorry, I decided to call, his name is technically Oliver Linehan, but I have long called him Oliver Linehan because his name looks like Linehan. So instead of mispronouncing his last name, I've decided from now on to call him Oliver Linehan. That way I get his first name wrong instead of his last name. Oliver Linehan, his typing session is at 9 a.m. And he came in to the session like pre-typed, as ISFJ. I guess I'd never really typed him, but or maybe I had. I don't remember. Anyway, so that's perhaps of interest to you since I typed you as the same type as I typed him. Oh, I know what else I wanted to talk about besides truth and stuff. And then, so I did my little truth spiel at the beginning of this. I think that if you're looking for utility via ideas, utility of ideas, the idea that we should talk about truth as operationally being no different than the statement, I think that you should agree with. That's powerfully useful because it puts people's frames back where they belong on themselves and their decision to speak and what that means, Eric, I always start doubting my type whenever I watch a typing session. Yeah, Oliver's cool. I like him. It's a good name too, Oliver. I also like Olive for girl. I like both those names. Now, if you have your last name be Linehan, but it's spelled Linehan, I bet everybody mispronounces his last name. Just like me. I bet everybody says Linehan when they see it. When you see it, you don't think Linehan. Hi there, Chaos Fuel. May I just remark that it was an absolute delight typing you. I don't get to type very many ENGPs, and it felt so homey. Like, oh, I understand when you're going like this and thinking about something, I understand exactly what's going on in your head. It's the same thing that goes on in my head when I do that. Like watching you think through the inky pinkies, I could practically imagine the exact thought process. Anyway, of course, Jeff Shaw likes to. Jeff Shaw seems to think that intuitive is a title that King Jeff Shaw confers onto only a very select few. So the more intuitive somebody is in actuality, the more heavily Jeff Shaw is going to press on the, well, I'm not sure what this person is, but he's definitely a censor. I was looking at some of the live chat replay in that typing session. I didn't watch it, but I scrolled along so I see the chat moving on, see what the chat had to say. And I could not help but notice Jeff Shine. I mean, the thing is, I wish he would answer the question, or I wonder what he has to say about the fact that literally every single typing I have ever done that he has had a comment upon, he has said I've typed them wrong. And he said that about very, very many specific typing sessions. How does he? So is his position that I type everybody wrong? And if so, why does he spend so much time watching my typing sessions? Why does he spend so much time watching my shit? If I'm so incredibly wrong about everything that I can't even type a single person correctly, that guy. Jeff Shaw goes, well, he's indecisive, so that eliminates thinker. I know, that kind of shit. Well, we think Jeff's an ENFJ. Okay, ask people, let me note for the record for everybody else as well that it is irresponsible of me to type somebody without actually typing them. And it's completely unreliable when I say what I type they think they are if I haven't actually typed them. I thought CJ was an ENTP until I was quite convinced of it until I typed him, and it was very obvious he was not. So obviously, my gut on what someone's type is before I actually type them is not reliable. But having said that, the general conversation around here leans towards ENFJ. There's a total lack of particulars in everything he says. So he provides no examples to illustrate any of the vaguely defined pseudo concepts he produces. I never hear him reference his past experience at all or anything like that. And what he's doing discursively is definitely NIFE shit. He's posturing himself as the one who knows and passes judgment on our attempts to have as much clarity as he has. It's just posturing. What's the genesis origins of the whole thing? I mean, I have no idea. It's just one day he showed up. It wasn't long after he showed up that he called and left me a drunken voicemail that I don't remember what it said. It was just like, I'm Jeff Shaw. He just, look, he's jealous. He's what you might call a hater, I guess, but I don't know. He's our Jeff Shaw, so whatever. He's fine. I removed one of his comments this morning where on my little 3-minute video where he said, "You're better than this, Eric." Okay, listen, I don't remember asking you to be my guru. Was that my best video ever? No, it was a little slow. But who knows what he meant, right? You're better than this, Eric. So what was bad about it? Can you be a little bit specific, please? If he wanted to critique it accurately, he would have said, this moves too slowly. Even at 3 minutes, even though you cover all 8 slots, this moves too slowly. And that would be an accurate critique. But I'm making decisions a lot of times on whether or not extra effort is worth it, That one it probably would have been. It would have been worth it to write it down he doesn't explain at all. That's his trick, CJ. He postures as Mya, but doesn't explain. So he uses words that a person who understood things well would use, but he excludes all of the meat of the words that people who understood things well would use. So I would say, well, you're onto something there, but it's not quite right. But then I'd explain what I meant. Jeff Shaw would just say, you're onto something there, but it's not quite right, and leave it enigmatic like that. So we both might start with the same condescending shit, but I actually have something to say. And and once I've said it, I invite people to critique it, respond to it on point. That's another thing that Jeff Shaw will not do. He will not respond on point to things. And operationally that plays out as, okay, Jeff Shaw, please teach me then what it is I'm wrong about and what I need to understand. Tell me words that inform me. And then crickets. Well, I mean, I've thought he was an INFJ because I think he one time said he was, so I just went with that, I guess. But he could be a drunk INFJ. Uh, my friend Corey can be a little toxic with me, and so it's definitely within the capacity of the INFJ to act like that. But I understand better why my friend Corey feels or might feel personally threatened by me than I understand why some random person would be. So the bottom line is, I believe, again, without having typed in, that Jeff Shaw is some kind of NFJ. And I'm leaning towards ENFJ because the total set of data I have keeps growing increasingly large. And as far as I can recall, I've never heard him use a single instance of referring to his own personal experience to explain anything. That seems more SI polar than 8. Jeff Shaw likes you, Jose? Well, I mean, he seems to like being Jeff Shaw here. I don't know if that means he likes me. I think he kind of hates me, frankly, but and it's like it's understandable why one might hate me if one views oneself as vastly more intuitive than the rest of the world, and you encounter me, you're gonna feel like this fucker needs to be taken down a notch. Especially if you're not listening and parsing what I'm saying for its value as argumentation, but are very FE aware and are picking up on what you conclude is self-importance, meh, 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 too much confidence, too much whatever. In other words, it needs to be taken down a notch. Well, if he has an addiction, CJ, it's to failing to take me down a notch. He's addicted to failing to take me down a notch because it never works. And what's cool about it is, as he continues to persist in this whole thing, everybody's getting a clearer concept of what FENI bullshit looks like. We have a term for it. It's Jeff Shawing somebody. We have lots of explanations as to what it looks like. It's basically posturing yourself as an expert in the field, passing judgment on another person's work in that field, but additionally, without actually explaining anything as to why your negative judgment has been passed. So I mean, it's the power of examples is it concretizes, even for NI types, the conceptual whole you're trying to convey. And since Jeff Shine is a technique that's common to FE types a lot, probably if you're kind of bitter and you're you're using FENI as a weapon, it looks like that, and that, or at least that's one kind of member of the weaponized language army. You know, that's one way to do battle where you're taking the battle from the actual concepts and ideas being discussed, and you're simply battling between who should have who should be afforded more standing as a guru or something. How TINI would in comparison? Well, TINI wouldn't be so interested in all that FE shit, you know? That's all FE shit. I want to be more respected than you. Or I don't like your attempt to claim exclusive correctness in an area that most people view as a matter of interpretation rather than um, a matter of explanation. And that's the key distinction. That's the key difference between what I am doing and what other people are doing with typology. Other people are treating typology as though it's a matter of interpretation. I'm treating typology as though it were a means of explaining. Eric, what is this? My wife claims people try to emotionally manipulate me, but I'm completely oblivious to that kind of stuff. Like people take advantage of my kindness and use it against me. I mean, do you experience that phenomenon yourself, or is that how she's interpreting what you're experiencing as something else? Because it could be there's nothing you're lacking. It could be your wife is lacking um, adequate intuition to recognize that the thing that's happening is actually harmless and in fact maybe good and not you being taken advantage of. Okay, well, in that case, uh, I wouldn't say it's so much of a function thing as a particulars thing. It would suggest you've not been subject to much abuse and betrayal in your life prior. This is my interpretation as an SI user. Maybe an NI user would interpret it differently, but um, your wife very well may be ESFJ, but they could very well be INTJ too. INTJs are like extremely paranoid about FE manipulation. Oh yeah, that's right. We got to wrap this up here pretty soon. Well, I mean, FE is an interface, which means it has both a receiving knowing half to it and a externalizing shaping half to it, right? Anyway, I gotta get off this because great, thanks, Chaos Fuel. Sounds fantastic. I'm gonna get off this soon because I don't want to cannibalize viewership of the Linehan affair. Linehan Lenahan, Oliver Oliver. Which is your name today? Your name is Oliver Oliver Lenahan Linehan. That's what they call you, and why to go having such a strange name. All right. My first, let me just offer you my condolences, Chaos Fuel. I'm sorry but you're an ENTP. You've got a long, painful, shitty road ahead of you. As do I. Because it's not really that good of a time today. You know, it's like, boy, I wish I could like follow through on some plans and stuff and like, you know, accomplish something successful and meaningful. That'd be cool, but I never will, I guess. Oh well. If I could only decide what I want. Oh, I don't know. Or a clear course of how to get there. But there are so many possible routes. I'll just sit here and muse about it for a while more. You're doomed. You are doomed, just like me. All right, everybody. Love you all. Thanks for being here. If you're interested, check out the line of hand typing. It's coming up in exactly 12 minutes.